This week we have reviewed the big four banks in the country, J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo and Company, and Citigroup, all of which report their earnings today. And then the fourth is the Bank of America, which will report their earnings on Monday, tax day. And how appropriate. If there is one thing that these four banks have in common, it is the effect that the Tax Reform and Jobs Act is having on these large financial institutions. Today, a preview of the Bank of America's earnings report and how it is impacted by tax reform. Welcome, it's Friday, April 13th, and this is ValueSide. I'm your host, David Ravel. Now, our analysis today should not be considered a recommendation either to buy or sell this or any related security. To really understand the current condition of all these banks, we have to go back to the financial crisis of 2008. As we noted, Citibank was effectively insolvent after the financial crisis struck, and the three other banks were not far behind. For the Bank of America, 2008 presented them with a tsunami of bad loans. Looking at the numbers, loan losses in 2007, the year before the crisis, stood at a little under $8.5 billion. In other words, the bank had to write off $8.5 billion of loans that customers who, for whatever reason, could no longer pay off. Many of these were bad mortgages and credit card debt that the consumers simply could not meet. Now, the very next year, 2008, the year of the crisis, those bad loans had grown 5 3/4 times to an astronomical $48.5 billion of loans that had to be written off by the Bank of America. Suddenly, the bank was in trouble. What before had been an isolated problem among a few borrowers had suddenly snowballed into a major catastrophe for the big four banks. To get out of this financial hole took the combined efforts of regulators, Congress, and the bank's management. First, some financial regulations were relaxed. Then Congress passed TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, that delivered a much-needed bailout to the banks. But too little attention is being paid to the action of the banks themselves. Brian Moynihan, the chairman, and the senior management at Bank of America went into a capital-raising frenzy. In the next 2 years, they would sell stock and issue bonds as much as they could to bolster their capital base. In just 2 years, Bank of America would double the number of common shares they had and double the amount of long-term debt on their books. All of this in response to the crisis. Which brings us to tax day. This year it falls on Monday, April 16th, the same day as the Bank of America reports their earnings and has their conference call. After this first quarter adjustment, all four of these banks will see a significant drop in their corporate tax rate. For most, it will be a 10 percentage point drop from about 30% last year to a 20% this year going forward. This is extremely important. The Bank of America has already indicated that they will use at least some of this increased income to strengthen their balance sheet, to pay down long-term debt, and to buy back some of those shares that they sold after the crisis. And by strengthening their financial position, B of A should be in a much better position should another crisis occur. So, here we have an important public policy departure. We have gone from a position of having the federal government become the guarantor of last resort to having a bank system that is strong enough to stand up on its own even in the worst of financial storms. It's really a watershed moment, and one I'm sure is not lost on Brian Moynihan and the people at Bank of America. And that brings you up to date on the Bank of America. B of A will hold their first quarter earnings report and conference call on Monday, April 16th at 8:30 in the morning Eastern Time. You can read the report and join in on the conference call all on their website in the Investor Relations page. Now we'll be back on Monday to report on some more market leaders. This has been a copyrighted edition of ValueSide, published before the opening of the New York Stock Exchange for Friday, April 13th. Don't forget, you can hear ValueSide on Google Music, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and now on YouTube. For all of us at ValueSide, I'm David Ravel, hoping you have a great day.